Hi, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Michelle Keys, and I'm the Global Head of Travel Account Management for Travel Guard. Thank you for joining us today for a discussion on travel safety for the LGBTQ plus community. Before I ask our esteemed panel of speakers to introduce themselves, I want to let you know that we will be answering any questions at the end of today's session, and you can submit them at any time via the chat. Now I'll hand it over to our speakers. Gabrielle, perhaps you could go first.
Thank you, Michelle. And hi, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Claiborne. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder and CEO of Transformation Journeys Worldwide. We're an inclusion training consulting firm with a trans and gender expansive focus. I travel internationally helping cutting edge organizations across multiple business sectors position themselves to attract and retain the best talent, foster collaborative working environments, thus maximizing innovation and directly impacting the bottom line by creating fully trans inclusive environments and experiences. As a trans-owned certified LGBT business enterprise, my firm was honored as Out Georgia Business Alliance's 2018 Small Business of the Year and received the Atlanta Hawks, which is our professional basketball team here in the state of Georgia, USA, where I live, their prestigious 2019 True Comes in All Colors Award for my company's cutting edge inclusion work. I'm also an author of Embrace Your Truth, A Journey of Authenticity, a TEDx speaker, and my work has been featured in Forbes. I'm so glad to be a part of today's conversation, Michelle.
Thank you, Marley. Perhaps you can go next.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Marley Conte. I am a writer, consultant, speaker, specializing in diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion, with specialism in trans plus inclusion, non-binary identities, travel, and LGBTQ inclusive parenting. I am also a non-binary person and parent of one, sharing my lived experience of transition, traveling as a queer family, and raising a child to be conscious of gender diversity, to open up the conversation around marginalized trans identities and show how diverse the LGBTQ community truly is. As well as all of that, I leverage my lived experience and expertise by chairing the Connection Submittee as a member of the IGLTA Gender Diverse Travel Advisory Group.
Great. And Ed, last but not least.
Hello from New York City. I'm Ed Salvato. I use he, him pronouns. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this super important conversation with my highly regarded co-panelists. I'm an LGBTQ travel expert and consultant. I speak frequently about queer travel and travel safety at mainstream and LGBTQ plus related travel related events around the world. As for my day job, I am also a full-time professor of tourism and hospitality at New York University.
All right. Thanks all for introducing yourselves. To kick it off, I want to talk a little bit about why we chose this subject. While we know that traveling as a LGBTQ plus person is broadly the same as anyone else, it is true that members of the community often face unique safety and security challenges, especially when traveling to certain countries. Today, we will be discussing some of those challenges with our speakers with the goal of helping you or someone you know or work with feel more prepared, comfortable, and confident during their travels. So the first step with any traveler is to obviously thoroughly research their destination. So Ed, would you mind talking a little bit about that process, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not muted. Good. Of course, as LGBTQ plus travelers, we absolutely have the right and privilege, just like everyone else, to visit any destination our hearts desire. That said, we carry an extra responsibility to understand not just the laws, but also the social and cultural context that we'll be entering. Homosexuality, it remains criminalized in over 60 countries, yet many of these are quite welcoming in practice. On the other hand, some places without anti-LGBTQ laws may still have norms and or expectations that make it difficult for us to fully be ourselves. Fortunately, there are trusted resources that can help. Organizations like IGLTA provide solid overviews of legal and cultural conditions, while travel content creators like Nomadic Boys and Every Queer offer personal on-the-ground insight, what it actually feels like to be there, what to expect, and how to engage safely and respectfully. Before we travel, it's important to combine official information with community-based perspectives. This research doesn't restrict our travel. I think it empowers it. We deserve to see the world just like everyone else, and with the right preparation, we can travel confidently, safely, and meaningfully.
Ed, I appreciate that point you made about we carry an extra responsibility to understand not just the laws, but also the social and cultural context that we'll be entering. And part of understanding the social and cultural context is asking yourself this question: do I see people like me visible at this destination? Is there a vibrant LGBTQIA2S plus community there? There's a saying, you can't be it unless you see it. And this holds true when it comes to creating a safe, equitable, and enjoyable travel experience, especially for LGBT travelers and especially for gender diverse travelers whose gender identity and or expression may challenge a culture's understanding and legal position around the expansiveness of gender. The reality is many gender diverse travelers don't have the luxury of blending into the destination that they're traveling to. And because of this, we're seeing pushback in the form of anti-LGBTQIA2S plus legislation and laws in many countries, as Ed mentioned, that make it unlawful and even unsafe for us to travel to. Because of this, it's prudent to do your research and see if there are any organizations on the ground at the destination that you're wanting to travel to, that represent your lived experience so that you can better understand how they are being received by their own neighbors. You can even reach out to these organizations and ask them for any advice that they can offer while you're traveling in their country. At the end of the day, equitable representation on the ground at the destination that you're wanting to travel to is a true litmus test for determining your experience, and it is highly recommended before securing your travel plans.
Yes, thanks, Gabrielle. As a trans non-binary person, every time I take a new trip, not only do I need to do the usual due diligence to see if the destination is safe for me to go to, but I also must go through a series of checklists before I even get there. So I think that the best way to stay safe when traveling is down to preparation and research. One of the things I'm always conscious of is what happens if I'm ill. Can I find an LGBTQ plus friendly or knowledgeable GP or doctor? What are the rules for single-sex spaces in hospital? Which ward would I be placed in as a non-binary person? I believe the more research we can do about the unexpected things, the better our experience will be once we reach the destination. As Gabrielle was mentioning, finding a local community and be able to ask this question and get real life experience example would go a long way to create safety.
Marley, thank you for bringing up those points, because a lot of times, we just don't know what we don't know when we're trying to make preparations. And I would also say that having fully aligned legal documents is imperative when setting you up for success. As a trans woman, I remember traveling in those early years or early days of my transition when I had misaligned legal documents. My name and gender marker didn't match my gender presentation. It was clunky, cumbersome. I was anxious and fearful in many times. I was never sure how I was going to be treated by the airline ticket agent, the TSA agent, the immigration agent, the hotel front desk staff, with everyone that I had to present my ID to. And it wasn't until I removed that barrier of misaligned legal documents that I was able to move through my travel experiences with more ease, confidence, and safety. For this reason, I strongly encourage everyone to procure aligned legal ID, that coincides with your gender identity, gender expression, and even sex, to the degree that your local jurisdiction will in fact allow you to do so. The reality is, though, unfortunately, many countries do not offer or make it difficult to secure fully aligned legal documents because of their archaic and even erroneous understanding of gender. The good news is, however, there are organizations like the Advocates for Trans Equality here in the US that are offering solutions to these challenges. Nonetheless, despite having fully aligned legal documents, it doesn't always guarantee smooth sailing through immigration. And this is due to the lack of education and legislation that targets members of our community, again, especially those of us who are gender diverse. And these challenges are often exacerbated as immigration policies continue to evolve and change. And we're seeing this play out before our very eyes across the globe. Currently, here in the US, there have been incidences of gender diverse travelers having their fully aligned passports confiscated because of immigration officers' interpretation that travelers' perceived sex does not match what is reflected on their legal documents. In other countries, gender diverse travelers have been known to be detained in holding cells that are inconsistent with their gender identity. Because of these uncertainties, the Gender Diverse Travel Advisory Group of IGLTA Foundation, which I chair and serve along with Marley, we recommend exploring pre-clearance transit destinations that may offer immigration experiences that are less obtrusive, allowing a traveler to avoid unreasonable and even inequitable scrutiny.
Great. Thank you, Gabrielle, for those insightful comments. Marley, would you mind talking to everyone about your preparation process and what that looks like when you're traveling with children?
Yes, sure. As we mentioned, traveling as a trans plus person can be daunting at times. And I feel like I need to be even more careful when traveling as a family. My kid is only 9, and as any parent, my first priority is my kiddo's safety. As a trans non-binary parent, I'm even more aware that just being who I am could have implication on her traveling experience and safety as well as my own. Having a proper documentation is essential. I always carry the original copy of my kid's birth certificate, for example, and it also helps that my kid Italian's passport state who her parents are on it. I would recommend for any adoptive parent or surrogate parents to be even more cautious and carry every document you can think is relevant. I would also check ahead of traveling which local laws and customs regarding same-sex adoption and surrogacy to avoid any issues at destinations.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marley. Now, let's move on to traveling with medication. Gabrielle, what are some tips that we can give travelers when they need to take essential medications on their travels?
Great question, Michelle. You know, it's really important to know where your destination stands on certain medications, especially if the medications that you're taking can be misconstrued as fraudulent or even inconsistent with your perceived gender or sex. And so, for this reason, it's always wise to transport your medication in the bottles that they come in from the pharmacy and have evidence from your doctor that your medications are, in fact, prescribed and necessary. This also applies to gender diverse children who may be on puberty blockers. And as you pack for your trip, ensure that you have enough to cover for the time that you will be away, and even have a contingency plan if for whatever reason your trip gets extended. This could include having a couple of extra days of supply and or determining if there is a gender affirming provider at your destination where you could obtain an emergency dosage. Marley, do you have anything else to add to these?
Yes, thanks. Some of us might be wearing prosthetics or binders. It is highly recommended that you declare these ahead of searches, even if we carry them into carry-ons. Make sure to have relevant prescription or a letter from your doctor that states that these are needed for medical purposes. And in this way, no one will be caught by surprise. And hopefully you will not have to deal with a lot of unwanted questions. If you do not want to discuss these out loud, you can always ask to speak to someone privately. And I recommend always bring a chaperone with you if you do so. I would also recommend packing any medical supplies and prosthetics that you might not need during your travel in your checked luggage. And remember to remove batteries from any battery-operated items. Most importantly, remember to check regulation at landing and transit airport and returns airports, as not every country will have the same rules.
Thanks, Marley. Ed, do you have any advice for people that may need to travel with HIV medications?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Individuals living with HIV may face additional scrutiny when traveling, as some countries still restrict or even ban entry for HIV-positive visitors, especially for long-term stays or work assignments. While many destinations allow short-term visits, short-term travel without any issue, there are still places where HIV status could affect entry or cause complications. Today's HIV medications regimens are much simpler than in the past, often involving just one pill a day, but precautions are still important. As already mentioned, travelers should carry medications in their original containers and bring a copy of their prescription or a doctor's note. Because not all medications are available globally, it's wise to pack an extra supply in case of unexpected delays or disruptions, as Gabrielle was mentioning. Planning ahead will help ensure a smooth and safe journey.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ed. Now we're going to move on to our next topic, which is business travel. And Ed, actually, I'm going to hand it back to you. Would you mind telling us how traveling for work can be difficult for members of the community?
Yes, absolutely, sure. Business travel presents a unique set of challenges for LGBTQ plus professionals, challenges that many organizations haven't fully accounted for. The key difference is this: vacation travelers choose where they go. Most business travelers usually do not. LGBTQ plus employees may be asked to travel to places where their identity is criminalized, marginalized, or simply not acknowledged. And the implications are real. Should I out myself to colleagues and business associates? Will I be invited to traditional social environments that may be uncomfortable for me? If there's a medical emergency, will a same-sex spouse be recognized or even allowed to visit? There are serious, often invisible issues that queer employees face on the road. For companies with a global footprint, especially those in HR, security, and risk, it's critical to move beyond one-size-fits-all travel policies. Proactive organizations are now developing guidelines specifically for their LGBTQ plus business travelers, offering risk assessments, destination-specific support, and clear emergency protocols. A truly inclusive travel program doesn't just check the diversity, equity, and inclusion box. It ensures every employee can travel safely, confidently, and with the support that they deserve. Travel Guard recently published a new guide to LGBTQ plus business travel, the original version of which I co-authored, which is available on their website, travelguard.com/LGBTQ. It dives into these issues in greater detail and includes helpful case examples and resources.
Great. Thanks, Ed. So that concludes the pre-travel section of the presentation. And we've added some useful research links to the deck. Remember to always refer to multiple sources when doing your research. Content can become out of date or unreliable very, very quickly. So we've done our research, we've packed our bags, and now we're at the airport. Gabrielle, let's talk about this stage of the trip.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. A best practice to avoid unwanted scrutiny and having to navigate triggering and even evasive inquiries with TSA agents is to simply secure TSA pre-check. I have this myself, and it is an amazing investment that I've made there. This requires less than $100 investment, and it comes with a 5-year membership, which is more than worth the investment. This, more times than not, allows you to bypass long airport security checkpoint lines and avoid having to be exposed to that infamous TSA full body scanner that we're all familiar with. And this is especially relevant for trans and gender diverse travelers who get flagged after using this scanner because, one, there are only two gender designations, M and F, available that a TSA agent can select from. So immediately we recognized that this scanner was not designed to equitably support non-binary travelers who have or desire to have an X gender marker on their legal documents. And two, it's subject to that TSA agent's correct assessment of a traveler's gender, which is oftentimes incorrect, resulting in them being pulled aside in plain view of other passengers and having to out ourselves in response to an unnecessary pat down and heightened interrogation. So hopefully from this, you can see just how apprehensive and even triggering and volatile it can be to navigate TSA or immigration as a trans or gender diverse traveler.
I truly can, Gabrielle. Thank you for that. Ed, I know you've been really impressed with global entry. Can you tell us about how that works?
Absolutely. I love it. A global entry it's a great program, especially if you'd rather avoid the long lines and interactions with customs and border protection agents when re-entering the United States. As Gabrielle mentioned, it costs around $100, it lasts for 5 years, and it includes TSA pre-check benefits. Some credit cards actually reimburse this fee too. So what you do is you just simply apply online, you schedule a brief in-person interview, and once approved, you get a known traveler number, which you can then apply to your airline profiles, which then enables a TSA pre-designation on your boarding pass, allowing you to access that awesome pre-check line. When you return from abroad, you use a separate fast track lane, you look into the camera, and you're often just waved through. They've even launched an app that lets you take a selfie upon disembarkation from your returning international flight and skip the kiosk altogether. It's simple, efficient, and I think totally worth it.
That sounds great, and I wish we had that in Europe. My perspective, knowing my rights at the airport helps me manage the situation in a calm and safe way. For example, you're always allowed to choose who will perform the search. I tend to follow my gut instinct on this. Sometimes it's just a feeling for a person that I think might be kinder or more understanding of the situation, or being able to choose someone whose gender aligns with my identity. It is good to remember that officers are required to let you know what they will be doing before actually starting any kind of search. This goes for any type of search, from body to wand and bag searches. If you feel uncomfortable to be so exposed, you can request for the search to take place privately. And I would recommend to bring a chaperone of your choosing with you if you opt for this option. Just remember to stay calm and ask to talk to a supervisor if you feel like your needs are not met. As Gabrielle mentioned, most body scanners have a default setting, female or male, which means whichever buttons is pressed, some bodies like mine will show inconsistency with the default system. And this inevitably brings out the conversation of, just to let you know, I've had a double mastectomy. It is a feeling of constant outing to people I don't even know and most likely not see again in my life, and it is exhausting. To avoid this, you can opt for a private search, as mentioned on above, for example, or I now carry a card for the officers to read and be made aware. I believe the US TSA, the Transport Security Administration, actually has a template for you to fill in and print in case of like health condition or disability. So you could use it as a way to disclose any prosthetic too, or simply voicing that you are transgender or non-binary.
Great. Thanks, Marley. Now we're going to move on to safety and security. And again, back to you, Gabrielle. What safety advice do you have for LGBTQ plus travelers when they're out and about?
You know, Michelle, situational awareness is crucial in setting your travel experience up for success, whether it's commuting via public transportation, navigating long lines at the airport, using the restroom, or seeing sights at your destination. In these instances, situational awareness for a traveler, especially a gender diverse traveler, can look like keeping to yourself while taking public transportation so as not to put yourself in precarious or dangerous situations. Being aware of what's happening around you in large assembly areas like the airport or even a sports venue. and develop an exit strategy in the event that you need one, or using the restroom without engaging with other people to avoid from being harassed or being accused of being harassed, of harassment, excuse me. And all of these situations can be much less stressful if navigating, as Marley mentioned earlier in their comments, navigating in numbers. Having an advocate travel with you, whether it's a friend, family member, or a trusted colleague, this will go a long way in easing the stress of the unknown. Knowing that you have someone who will be willing to step into a situation if things kind of get dicey allows you to be fully present during your travel experience without being on high alert all the time. If group travel is not possible, then keep the phone number of those who can be there for you. This could also include your local consulate in case of an emergency. The quickest way to raise flags during your travel is to be unsure of yourself and exude verbal or nonverbal cues that could be misinterpreted or considered volatile and threatening by those who are providing services during your travel. So with this, it will be important to balance your situational awareness with joy and confidence, knowing that you have done your due diligence in setting yourself up for success and that you have every right to enjoy every experience along your journey.
Wow, that's super detailed and important advice. That's great, Gabrielle. Thank you. I think it's also important to talk a little bit here about community websites and apps, as these can be a useful way for connecting with locals and finding the best bars and queer-friendly venues and a little bit of joy. But it's essential to exercise caution, especially when it comes to dating or hookup platforms. In countries where LGBTQ plus relationships are criminalized or heavily stigmatized, governments have been known to monitor these apps and even engage in entrapment. So as a traveler, you might face serious consequences, but the stakes are often even higher for the locals you meet. You can leave a country if something goes wrong, but they can't. So while we all want to connect with people when we travel, we have to think not only about our own safety, but theirs too. A good rule of thumb: research the laws and cultural climate before using these apps, and always prioritize safety for you and for others.
Great comments, Ed. Thank you. So now we're in the final part of today's conversation or discussion presentation, where our panelists will share some of their travel experiences and what they've learned from. Marley, perhaps you could go first.
Sure. My experience, I think documents are often a big issue for trans plus people. Not everyone can change their markers on or the name as easily as a deed poll. Take my example. I'm non-binary, is not recognized in most countries, so I cannot have the correct marker on my passport. And I am a dual citizen. I hold both Italian and British citizenship. And while in the UK, changing my name would take probably 5 minutes, a good internet connection. In Italy, we're talking about a 2 to 3 year process with court appearances, lawyers, a panel of experts, and a lot of money to be spent. As a dual citizen, my passport have to match, so I cannot change one without changing the other. And as of today, all my documents are still under my dead name and my gender assigned at birth. Can you imagine how many times I get that name or misgender during a trip? From tickets to security to check-in, it's almost constant. And although it might not seem like something big, I'm going to give you some context. You see, the constant misgendering and dead naming is actually a form of microaggression that chips away at our identity and constantly reminds us that for other people, our identity is not valid and is not worthy of respect. The toll that something so little can have on our mental health is quite big. And as per the latest survey from the Travel Project and others charities, something as simple as using the right pronoun can halve the chances of attempting suicide. Just think about that for a moment. Using one small little word can actually save lives.
You're absolutely right, Marley, about that one small word could actually change lives. And I want to thank you for being so vulnerable with your experience because a lot of times, service providers in the tourism space just don't know the challenges that we have to navigate as gender diverse people. So thank you for bringing those forward to us. I also believe that doing a post travel assessment is just as important as planning and navigating your travel. I encourage folks to document what went well and what didn't, because this can actually inform your next trip. When traveling to new places, oftentimes we don't know what we don't know until we experience it. Why not benefit from the experiences? Whether they're a memory that you'll never forget or a lesson that you'll never want to repeat. Both are essential in creating sustainable travel experiences that are safe and enjoyable, as well as it will contribute to that sense of joy and confidence that I mentioned earlier. Last October, I had the opportunity to travel to Osaka, Japan, which has been my farthest destination that I've traveled by far as Gabrielle. And in full transparency, I was very apprehensive. In hindsight, though, there were so many things that I learned from that trip, both favorable and challenging, that will inform my next trip. So, if you've never done a post travel survey, I really want to encourage you to do that. It will literally transform your travel experiences exponentially.
Great. Thank you, Gabrielle. And it looks like we have a few questions. So let me go down the list. And Marley, perhaps you can take maybe one of these. What advice can you give a trans student as they're often forgotten about?
You're right. I think we often forget about trans students, especially if they travel abroad for studying. I think finding community is where I would recommend check with your university if they have any Pride or LGBTQ groups that you can join. Check with your local community if there are any trans groups. Look at website like IGLTA. Sometimes we do list groups. I think community is where you would find your joy, and when you will find help that you need whilst you're somewhere away from your home and the people that you usually rely on. So find your people is what I would say.
If I could also jump in here, I love those comments, Marley. Thank you for that. I would also encourage trans and gender diverse students to find organizations like IGLTA and get plugged into them as a resource, because IGLTA is doing a lot of work around LGBTQ plus student and work permits. So find organizations who actually specialize in setting you up for success. If this is your experience, it will just kind of go a long way in helping you understand what you don't know that you don't know, and as well as provide resources to you that could really make a difference in your travel.
I'm going to just jump into this is such great guidance. I have a niece who identifies as queer, and she was at Tufts University, spent the last one of her semesters in Italy, and she was going to a kind of a small rural village and was assigned to a home where she was going to live with the family. And she called me, an LGBTQ travel expert. She goes, should I out myself to them? Should I out myself to the program? And I just thought, what a great question. Yeah. And so we had a nice conversation around that, and she ended up having a fantastic time. But I think that if there's anybody on the, listening on the webcast that is in these programs thinking about not only LGBTQ queer safety when folks are traveling, but in the homestay specifically, are these folks okay with someone who identifies as queer or trans or non-binary or gay? It's a really interesting question. I'm not sure how developed that resource is.
Yeah.
Great, Ed. Thank you for that. I see another question. How difficult has it been to get HRT whilst traveling or studying abroad? Who wants to jump in and answer that question?
Marley?
I don't take hormones, so I wouldn't be able to answer
Okay.
this one. But I would say, if you can, go prepared before you travel with extra doses, and maybe research LGBTQ friendly doctors before you arrive at destination. So if you need, you have kind of like a base where you can start a conversation about it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Marley. I know that I have never had to resort to this, fortunately. I think what Marley said is spot on. You have to make sure, where you're traveling to, where are there, like we were talking about, are there gender affirming facilities and professionals in that destination that you can get your HRT at? There's another option of like mail order. A lot of trans, because of the anti-trans legislation here in the States, we're having to figure out workarounds in those states that do not allow youth and adults to have access to gender affirming care, hormone therapy. So there are workarounds to this, but I think prepare yourself, do your research, find out what's on the ground at your destination, and find out if mail order is an option for you to get it from somewhere other than your destination. Those are a couple of recommendations.
Can I just add one more thing? Also, when you travel, please check before traveling, because some destinations do not allow you to bring hormones.
Absolutely.
So do check, even if you're thinking on mailing. You cannot do that at some destinations, so be prepared before you go on how you can navigate this situation.
And this is another point that I was sharing earlier about knowing what community exists on the ground where you're traveling to, because you could reach out to a community organization that focuses on trans and gender diverse health and resources, if you will, and just ask them, look, I'm traveling to your destination and I'm going to need hormone therapy while I'm there. Do any of your local trans and gender diverse colleagues or friends have access to hormone therapy? And if so, how can you put me in touch with those gender affirming care professionals so that I can have access as well? So there's a number of different ways you can target this, but you've got some great thoughts there.
All right. Great. Thanks, Gabrielle, for those extensive comments. I think we have one more question, and that is, how safe are large LGBTQ plus events globally? For example, Gay Pride, which we just had here in New York, or Gay Pride or gay cruises. Anyone have any insights on that question?
I mean, I've been to a bunch of all of the above. So, yeah, I mean, great question. It's like you look at some of the prides that you see negative, bad outcomes at, like, in Istanbul, when there was a pride a few years back, and there was some heavy police heavy police force against the parade, and you see some stuff like that. But I think generally speaking, strength in numbers, right? So you're in a place in New York City, for example, when every train line that you're on, almost every avenue, especially in Manhattan, it's just full of openly queer people on the train that maybe the day before they're just regular people sitting on the train, and then that day that everyone's wearing rainbow colors. You would have never have known the day before that there's like a train car full of queer people on that, right? So there's this incredible strength in numbers. Make sure, as Gabrielle and Marley were saying earlier, you want to be strength in numbers. You want to be with someone. You want to make sure people know where you are and who you are. Don't want, if you're not, if you drink or party or whatever, make sure you have a safety plan or someone who's looking out for you. There's all sort of common sense kinds of things. In terms of cruising, especially LGBTQ, all queer charter cruises or tours, you're in very good hands, because the organizers of those have been organizing these for a very long time, and they understand how to keep their guests safe, and that's part of their duty of care. If you're in a small queer or gay or lesbian group in a bigger situation, like a bigger tour or a bigger cruise, then there might be some additional safety concerns. Look for the brands that actively engage with the LGBTQ segment. IGLT would be a good resource for that. So I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add anything else, but I think those are the places where you maybe have a little bit of more wiggle room and can be a little bit more out and joyful in your holistic queerness.
Thank you for that perspective, Ed. As a trans person who was very involved with my local pride organization here in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, I spent the first 3 or 4 years serving in that position, educating pride organizations how to be more trans friendly, right? And so the good news is that a lot of pride organizations have moved the needle when it comes to understanding the width, breadth, and depth of our lived experiences. So I believe pride organizations are doing a lot of good work to make sure that everyone within the community and even allies who want to attend are comfortable showing up at these celebrations. I will say that making sure that you are surrounded with people that you feel comfortable with so that you're not going to be put in a precarious situation will go a long way in ensuring your success. And then I think the other thing, Ed, I've never been to P-Town. This is a local LGBTQ destination here in the States. And I'm always asking my gay friends, is it okay for a trans person to go there? Because of my experience with Pride organization, they said, absolutely, Gabrielle. So, there's some destinations that I've yet to travel to that I'm looking forward to. So it's a question that we have to ask ourselves every time, even though it says LGBTQ, does it mean fully LGBTQ, right? This is just a process that we've have to learn to navigate.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Marley,
Gabrielle.
what's your experience, Marley, there in the UK?
I love smaller Pride. So like I know London Pride is really good and is really big, but I tend to prefer like London Trans Pride, UK Black Pride, which are more crowdfunded, it's community based, it's joyful, it's diverse. So I try to find Pride that might not be as big or as famous or as, corporate representation and find the community where I know this is the joy, this is the people I want to be surrounded by, and and I find it's incredible experience, and yeah, those are the prides that I try to look for.
And when I come to the UK, I'm looking you up, and we're going to do that.
Same here. Well, thank you all. And thank you, panelists, for your insightful comments. I've certainly learned a lot, and hopefully our audience has as well. One housekeeping item in that will the webinar recording be made available afterwards? Most definitely. The link will be made available for all attendees.
Yeah, we have
Go
one
ahead.
more. We have one
Oh,
more question if we have
we
time.
do have one. Okay.
It says for an intake form, when asking information about the client, to have the first discussion on what will mold their trip. What will be the best way to ask or inquire if LGBTQ is something we need to take into consideration for their trip?
That is a great question.
Great question. Yes, great question.
Yeah. I would say, is there anything, you could frame it as, is there anything personal you'd like to share with us that could make your trip better? And then if people want to disclose part of their identity, they can do it in that question. And you're not directly asking, please share everything with me that you might not be comfortable with.
I love that. I love that. I think some best practices that organizations and even travel advisors can be mindful of is on your intake form, making sure you're asking for a person's, because again, trans and gender diverse people may not have fully aligned legal documents. So if you're collecting legal information, you might want to ask, what name do you use or what name do you go by? And also, what are your pronouns? by asking these questions, you are sending a message to the person that is completing this intake form that one, you understand the importance of meeting them where they are, and two, you're not having to educate them on what it means to, be respectful with someone who may have a different lived experience from you. I do love the question that Marley suggested about, what specifically do you need to make your travel experience enjoyable and safe? I think that goes a long way in opening up the conversation and allowing you to meet that person where they are in that first conversation. That first touch that you have with that client or colleague, that's going to set the tone for the rest of the experience. So making sure you're setting the tone up front goes a long way in establishing that trust with them.
I have a
Yeah,
thought.
and
Oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Thank you.
I was just gonna add, especially as parents, many times LGBTQ friendly hotels or areas in a city are not necessarily catering for families because
Yeah.
it's a very adult single couple destination. So even at things that could, oh, you're a family, I'm just gonna mention that this might not be the best area for you. You could relocate here because you still have this safety and security. Just think of who your customers are and take it, the extra step.
I would add to this, why not just ask this question to everyone, right? So we have an intake form for any customer. So it's like, hey, talk about your party. Anybody, can you provide us pronouns for everyone in your party? Any documentation we should be thinking about? Any special concerns or needs or fears? My brother and his wife travel with her son who is on the autism spectrum and he's blind. And so her intake form was like, oh yeah, thanks for asking. My son needs, to be in environments that aren't always noisy. So just asking that question, you're asking something that will create a better, more memorable experience ultimately for the travel experience. And you're creating a more satisfied customer. Let's face it, that person is going to feel seen and heard, right?
And oh, by the way, they're not going to only be the ones satisfied and appreciative of that. They're going to share their experience with you. That's a great way to market your services. Absolutely, word of mouth. So yeah.
I just learned yesterday that I was at another travel conference, and I just learned yesterday that the average traveler share a positive experience to at least 5 people on return. A disabled traveler does that 50 times. So think of, because there are minorities who crave their safety, their security, their accessibility, that gives you, I had such an amazing, this is the place to go. I'm going to tell everyone I know. So yes, just, just smart business.
That's a stunning statistic.
You can't argue with those stats.
No.
Exactly. Yeah. Just learned it yesterday. See, you always learn something new. Can I just answer a question about Sparkle Weekend in Manchester? I did not know this. What do you think about it? I have not been to this one, but I'm going to add it to my list and I'll let you know because this sounds fun. So
I learned a lot. Thank you, Marley and Gabrielle.
Back at y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you to our panelists and thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.